Well, greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 225 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. My name is Rick Verbanis, but you know that. And you also know I've got a great co host. His name is Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob, here we go. Pivot, 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 pivot.
I have no idea what that is.
No?
No, no,
Oh, you weren't a
no.
friend. You weren't a fan of Friends.
Oh my God, it was so long ago, Rick. I watched every episode, but I don't remember them,
Oh, Pivot
unfortunately.
was, when they were carrying the couch up the stairs in the apartment
Okay,
complex.
yeah, yeah.
And Ross was known as the pivot episode,
Okay,
where he
all
just
right.
kept yelling pivot, pivot, pivot. Bob, why am I yelling pivot at you?
I don't know. I don't know. I felt afraid for a moment, so I don't know why you're
Well,
yelling at me.
I will tell you, it's for all our listeners out there. They came to this episode, Bob, because we promised them
Oh,
last
right.
episode that we were
Yeah,
going to cover Captain America Generations One Shot,
yeah.
and it was a 2017 one shot that stars Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson, and we're not doing it.
We
We
are.
had to pivot, Bob.
We did. We did. We had an opportunity come up, and we took the shot.
Yeah, Bob, you're absolutely right. We had the opportunity for next episode to bring on writer David Morrell. And Cap fans may be scratching their head right now. David Morrell, what has he written for Captain America? Well, that would be the story we're covering today, which is Captain America: The Chosen, six-issue miniseries. And we thought, okay, well, since we have David Morrell coming on the show next week, we should definitely get to the story today. So we pivoted, and we're doing a recap. So we're not going to take you through page by page, panel by panel, like we normally would. We're going to go through issue by issue and recap it, and hopefully get you interested in going out and reading it yourself.
I think it's one of those miniseries that maybe slipped by a lot of folks, right? Because that was a time when there were a lot of books coming out, a lot of miniseries coming out. I think that decade, and so and maybe this one didn't catch people's fancies. They didn't see it, or they thought, well, that's one too many. I'm not picking that one up. But so I think it's definitely worth going through it because one, it's a pretty interesting story, and two, we're going to talk to David Morrell, and I'm excited about that. So yeah, I'm glad we pivoted.
Yeah, and David Morrell, if you are a film buff or adventure novelist buff from the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, um, David Morrell was the author of the first three Rambo books. So he wrote the books First Blood, and then Rambo, and the third one, and which got obviously made into movies. So we'll probably bring that up at some point too.
Yeah, I haven't read the second two, but I do remember the first one. The first one actually came out in 1972, so quite a few years before First Blood movie came out with Sly. But it was a very, very influential book in my life, and the movie was as well at that tender young age for me. So it's a double treat to be able to spend some time with him next episode and to dig into the story.
Yeah, and any excuse, Bob, that I can come up with to put off doing a story that was on your bucket list for this year, I'm happy to do.
Yeah, that's weird. It's weird. Oh
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
it just stuff comes up.
Stuff comes up.
And Bob, I gotta tell you, I'm a little worried, Bob, because we are recording this. Now, if people are listening on the day this comes out, it would be January 29th, 2025. We're recording this on January 21st, a mere week before it actually goes out. Now, a lot of stuff happens after we finish recording. I know, Bob, you just go off to your next adventure and so on. But all the magic happens in the background, and that's the editing and the producing and the marketing and all that fun stuff. And normally we have at least a 2 week buffer. Sometimes we've had a 3 week buffer, which is really screwed with our heads when we're trying to talk about current events. Um, but we only have a 1 week buffer, Bob, and I'm a little nervous because I don't know when I'm going to edit this episode. This upcoming weekend, which is for us, the 24th, 25th, 26th, I'm going to Orlando for the Comic Art Fans OAX, which is the Original Art Expo. And this is the second one, and I'm really looking forward to it because I have a really cool commission by Adam Hughes that I'm picking up of Viper, Madam Hydra, and maybe I'll get lucky and pick up some things. So I have no idea when I'm going to edit this particular episode.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your dedication to the cause, Rick, but I would caution you, don't leave that sweatshirt at home. Because if you notice, I'm wearing a little bit of a sweatshirt tonight myself. It's snowing in the north of Florida
Yeah,
at
yeah,
this
yeah. I
time.
looked at the forecast. Yeah,
So,
and it's supposed to be in the mid 50s,
woo!
which today, when I woke up,
Yeah.
it was 4. So,
Oh,
if
oh
I
my
can
goodness.
get 40,
Yeah.
40 degrees warmer
Yeah.
than
You're
what
gonna
I'm
see you
doing
at the
here,
pool. You're gonna be one of those northerners that comes down here in the winters hanging out at the pool.
yeah,
The rest
yeah,
of
I'm
us got
walking
our
around my
parkers
flip
on.
flops. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. All right.
yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
Anyway, so
Sweet.
we will see. So maybe we can keep this episode short so I can edit
Oh,
it
there you
quickly.
go. All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Pivot.
Pivot.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike Big Wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Build your fits of the day with Abercrombie's newest denim drop. I'll tell you where to start. Abercrombie's 90s straight jean goes with any shirt from tees to sweater polos. Super versatile. Their loose and baggy jeans are more trend forward, so I grab those when I go out with friends. Right now, get 25% off on almost everything at Abercrombie. Offers valid in stores and online January 23rd, 2025 to January 28th, 2025. In U.S. and Canada, exclusions apply as indicated. Online price reflects discount.
All right, let's get to today's episode. So we are covering Captain America: The Chosen, which, as I mentioned before, was written by David Morrell. And this actually was originally because this had a cover date of November 2007, but had a release date of September 6, 2007. You know what else came out in September of 2007, Bob?
What did, Rick?
Captain America issue 30, I'm sorry, 28.
All right.
So
Yeah.
Captain America 28, maybe 29, was sitting on the shelves when this came out. Now, what was going on in the Captain America world at that time? Well, it was post Civil War, so this was called the Initiative. But more importantly, it was the death of Steve Rogers.
Yeah.
And so I had my comic store back at this time, and I remember just there was a lot of interest and excitement about what's going on with Steve Rogers. When are they going to bring him back? And so this story, the 6-issue miniseries, was originally supposed to be called Captain America: The End. And the End was a series of books that Marvel was doing at the time, which was supposed to be the final story of Captain America, or this particular character, fill in the blank. And I want to say the first one was Peter David and Dale Keown doing Hulk: The End, just from memory, but there was a lot of different ones.
Huh.
But because there was the death of Captain America going on at this time, the Fallen Sun miniseries, the speculation of when Steve was going to come back, they decided to not call it The End. Instead, they call it The Chosen.
Well, that makes sense. Why confuse comic buyers and readers, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I will say, beautiful art in this story. And we'll share some panels on the screen as we kind of go through this. But uh, it wasn't a big seller, especially at least in my
Yeah.
store. But also, I think in general, it just wasn't a big seller. And I will say for those who maybe picked up the first issue and didn't read the rest, it really was, I think, best read in one sitting instead of waiting a month for every next issue to come out. Because it has a little bit of a slow, dramatic build that's hard to carry over month after month after month. But when you read it in one sitting, I think it's a lot more satisfactory.
Yeah, I agree 100% because I think I recall when I bought this, I might have picked it up, started reading it, and said I'll get back to it, and then you lose the thread of what's going on a little bit, and as you get into it, it's like peeling the layers of an onion. It has
I hate
callbacks.
that expression, Bob. You know why?
Why you don't like onions?
I hate onions.
Oh,
They're my
yeah.
kryptonite.
Oh, ooh, okay, good
And
to
and
know.
and
Take that one off the Christmas list.
yeah. I don't like the smell. I don't like the taste. I don't like the crunch. I don't like anything about onions. But I
Huh.
don't like the expression of peeling an onion. Who in their right mind just sits there with a raw onion in their hands, which, by the way,
Yeah,
is going to leave a really bad smell on your
yeah.
fingers that you can't get rid of for a
Oh, I
while,
like that.
and you're literally
Yeah,
peeling it. I mean, like, why?
yeah.
What? Who
Oh,
does that?
I do because I like to deep fry them. So, but anyway, it's like a disassembled onion blossom, awesome blossom. So, but in any case, there are some, you know, the threads that you go back and forth in this story, and it's helpful to have that in one sitting so that you can, remember them and reference them. Or if you have a really bad memory like mine, you just completely forget what happened 2 books earlier. So,
Yeah,
if there's too big of a time spread, so definitely worth checking out in one sitting.
and that's what we're going to do today. So, I'll take us into the creators. As I mentioned, David Morrell is the writer, and penciler is Mitch Breitweiser, and he's also inking his own pencils. And Mitch he did some other Captain America work too. But you have some art of his, don't you?
I do actually. I have several pages of his, Rick, because he also worked on Captain America: The Patriot miniseries, and another one called Zero Point, which is not well known, but also a pretty darn good story. And Mitch does the work. Oh, I'm sorry, Mitchell. I don't know him well enough to call him Mitch, but Mitchell has done all the pencils and inks on those 3 different series. So, and I have some from each, including The Chosen here.
He did a few issues of Captain America itself as well. So he did a few of those, but that Zero Point, that was that was the Theater of War that we covered, right?
It was in Theater of War, yeah, in that series, yes.
Yeah, yeah. That was. I remember liking the art in that book.
Mm.
That was the one with the UFO, I think.
It did, yes, with the 0 point energy, yeah, the Nazis were trying to get.
Okay. Hey, wait a minute. So Captain America: The Chosen was on your bucket list. So we're doing your bucket list no matter what today.
Was it on my bucket list?
It
Huh.
was.
I'll be darned. I'll be darned. Huh.
And you know what else is on your? You're just a Mitch Brett Whiteriser fan
I am.
because
I am.
Patriot is also on your bucket list.
Yeah, I am. I love Mitch's pencils. He's one of my favorites.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, he does an excellent job in this particular one. And then the colorist is Brian Reber, letterer Corey Pettit, and then editor Andy Schmidt and Alex Arbano. So actually Alejandro, sorry. The cover is also by Mitch Breitweiser. Do you want to take the listeners through on the cover of issue number 1?
Yeah, it's a really cool cover, Rick. It almost looks like watercolor. Because what we see here are 2 Captain America shields. One, a much larger one, covering almost, I think, probably 80% of the cover, and then a smaller one on the bottom edge of the page, covering probably another 30%. So they're overlapping. But what we see in this watercolor shield is the reflection of Captain America, and we see a profile, the right side profile of him, and his head is sort of tilted down a little bit, as if he's either deep in thought or he's, thinking. Well, that's the same thing, isn't it? Thinking deep in thought, but contemplating something. So it's a very just somber cover, but it just exudes a certain strength to me. And I
Mhm.
love this cover. I'd love to have this hanging on my wall.
Mm. It is a striking cover. Um, and the solicitation, would you like to hear that, Bob?
Rick, you know I would.
New York Times best-selling novelist and creator of Rambo, David Morrell takes on Captain America in Captain America The Chosen, a six-issue Marvel Knights limited series in the tradition of Spider-Man Reign. Superstar to be, Mitch Breitweiser provides the finest art of his career as he chronicles the last days of Captain America. And $3.99 got you this comic book way back 18 years ago.
Wow, prices were going up back then.
Yeah. Well, I think this was a uh, kind of like a prestige format, not like but it was like I think a harder cover stock a little bit,
Yeah, you're
if I
right.
remember correctly.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think we mentioned too that this is out of continuity. So all right, so we decided we were going to go back and forth. I'm going to take the odd issues. You're going to take the even issues, and so I'll take you through the first issue. Uh, uh, and again, we're not going to do this panel by panel, but essentially the story opens up. We're in Afghanistan, and this is a an outfit of the United States Marine Corps, which is fighting insurgents and operatives in Al Qaeda. And we see on this opening page a young man, a Caucasian man with blonde hair, and he's looking outside of a tent into what appears to be a sandstorm. And so the story really focuses on Corporal James Newman and essentially his inner struggles as he is been dispatched to a nearby village where smoke has been spotted. And the pages 2 and 3 are this beautiful half page, double page splash that goes across horizontally. And then the bottom half are 6 or 7 different panels. And so you see everything is kind of like tannish. The sky, the dirt, the mountains, because of all the sand that's in the air, and everything's colored that, including the Humvees that are, going through um, the towns that have been decimated by fire, and you see things on fire, but you also see the the opposition that are hiding in the ruins, and he's basically talking to himself, and he's wondering, you know, how he can tell the difference between the people he's there to fight and the people he's there to protect. And it's a really, I don't know, Bob. I think it's a really stunning double page splash.
Yeah, I mean, this is I mean, he's telling the story. I mean, this kid has been here for a while and he sees this every day, right? It's like Groundhog Day for him. Going out in outside the wire, doing the patrols, seeing the people on the street, knowing that his opponents are his enemies are hiding. And it's just as he talks about, it's frigid cold in the winter, it's boiling hot in the summer, and it's just over and over and over again, with the having to just repeat it. It reminds me of Anakin Skywalker complaining about the sand, right? Not liking the sand. I could hear Corporal Newman saying the same thing. It's pervasive.
Yeah. And I think the art is absolutely stunning. It just really, Mitch is outdoing himself with the amount of detail, but it also paints a really dramatic and tense situation. And at the same time, Corporal is having doubts as he's going through this. And then, um, he starts to think about the reason he joined, right? And this was again 2007, so not too long after 9/11, and so there is some mentioning of that in imagery here that we see. And there were a lot of people who enlisted shortly after 9/11. Um, and it looks like maybe James was one of them. And then as he goes through the town, they come up on some broken down vehicles, which are basically blockade, and some people that are hiding from the other side. They looks like they have a what is that? An RPG, um, some sort of
Man,
rocket
you are
launcher.
you are killing it tonight, Rick. You correctly identified the Humvee, and now you've identified the RPG, man.
Huh? What can I say? GI Joe.
I am proud.
Uh, and but then he also flashes back to his wife and his newborn son that he's only 5 months old and he's never met. And so they're back in San Francisco in the United States. And he carries a picture of his newborn son on his helmet as he's going through. And then the attack starts, and they are under heavy barrage. It's a really fierce gun battle, and then he's fighting. Some people are taking hits. He's getting the opposition, and then he makes it into a building where he comes across what he thinks are civilians, and they look unarmed, and he holds his weapon on them, but he says, I can't trust um, you know, do they have something underneath their robe? Um, and at this point, he realizes that he's going over the edge, and he drops his rifle, and he kind of slumps up against a wall. He puts his head in his hands. So I just went through several pages,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of a firefight going back and forth. And Mitch captures it beautifully in a very tense uh, uh, gun battle. But it really I don't know. It made me very tense myself reading
Mm-hmm.
it and
Yeah.
and watching it, and I think both the writer and the art captured it wonderfully.
Yeah, some of those panels you mean they were drawn in such a way as to indicate motion, right? You could, as if like the building itself was shaking, or
Hmm.
just the concussive waves of explosions are shaking your vision, and that is illustrated just perfectly in some of these panels that it looks like film.
Yeah. And then just there, as he's sitting there with his head in his hands, um, in coming through the silhouette of an open doorway, and keep in mind, Bob, like we've been into this like 15, 16 pages. We're 2/3 of the way or more through this story, and there's been no sign of Cap. And but now we see him, and he says, "To fight the enemies of freedom, to fight hate. You want to know how long we can keep doing this?" And you turn the page to this beautiful full page splash of Cap coming through the door and extending the helmet towards the corporal. And he says, as long as we're able to lift a finger, as long as we can draw a breath, you're going to need this, Corporal Newman. And he says, Captain America. And what an
Damn,
amazing image.
right?
Yeah.
This is, I wish I had this one, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And so at that point, Cap and Corporal James go rushing out to help one of the soldiers that is pinned out in the street, and they're taking fire from the rooftop across the street. And Cap just says, "Courage, honor, loyalty, sacrifice." And he picks up some debris and throws it at the top of the building, knocking the enemy down. And then there's somebody who's stuck in the Humvee, and he's yelling out that his leg is broken and he can't move. So they come over, and Corporal James jumps on top of the Humvee, turns the turret to another building, the top of the building, and he fires it and takes out that enemy. And then he tries to, to pull the soldier out and carries him over his back, and just in the nick of time because it blows up. And then he turns and he's yelling for Captain. He says, "Captain, do you see anybody else we need to help? Captain, do you hear me, Captain?" And then there's a shadow from behind him and says, "I hear you, Corporal Newman," but it's not Captain America. It's his captain.
Yeah, it's his
And
company commander.
yeah, and they're just like, "Who are you talking to?" And he's like, "Well, Captain America, he was here." And so they go on, and he's like, "There's nobody here. All I saw was you go out and rescue those men and take out the enemy." And which leads James to start to question his own sanity on these last couple of pages, and he just can't understand. He's, have I been fighting here so long? I've lost my mind. And he starts yelling out to the sky, "Captain America." And then we cut to, on the second to last page at the very bottom, we see Captain America with some oxygen coming in through his nose and some ventilators around him. And he's saying the same words he said before: courage, honor, loyalty, sacrifice. You're braver than you think. And you turn in the last page and you see a fully garbed Captain America in a hospital bed, which is in the middle of a room, a dark room. Looks like it's over the shield insignia. And it looks like we're seeing the back of a Nick Fury who's standing in the foreground, and then some sort of, I don't know what to call that lady. She's wearing a pretty tight outfit, but it's a doctor's coat with a short dress, and they're staring at him, and it says "to be continued."
Oh my gosh, Rick, that's a twist. Like Cap on a gurney with tubes in them.
Yeah. So what's going on, Bob? I have no idea what's going on, because I thought he was there in Afghanistan helping out that soldier, but it turns out that he's on this medical bed. Uh, what's going on? Any thoughts?
Well, no. I noticed there's a screen on the wall behind Cap, and we see Newman, in Afghanistan, and he's kind of looking around like he doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if, like, is that connected to the scene? Are the folks in the room, are they able to see that screen? Do they know what's going on? Like, how is this even happening?
I don't know. Maybe you could tell us. Why don't you take us a recap of issue 2?
All right, so we'll just jump right into issue 2, right? And so the name of this issue is "The Shape of Nightmares." So that's a little bit scary there, but basically this issue starts off in the same facility that we just saw Captain America on the gurney, and we notice here that he's laying in bed. And he's far less muscular than we remember him being. In fact, he's in this scene, he's not wearing his Captain America uniform.
Yeah, I have a problem with that.
You had a problem with the continuity.
I did.
Yeah,
Because this is, I think, issue 2 is the only one where he's
yeah,
not in Captain America uniform, laying on the gurney bed.
yeah. Well, what we can see, because he's not in uniform, is that he's looking a little emaciated. So and he's hooked up to a lot of machines here. And of course, he doesn't have those big tubes plugged into his chest like he did in the previous issue. But he's not looking healthy. I think that's the bottom line. And
Yeah.
we learn it's the same lab, by the way, where Rogers first received his super soldier serum back in the day. But we also hear the doctors talking to each other, and presumably to Nick Fury as well, that they're trying to treat him, and whatever they're giving him doesn't seem to be working. In fact, they seem to suggest that he may not live much longer. So there's a little side thing going on here in this scene in the laboratory or the medical facility, and that there's a technician working on one of the machines, and he's got a real shifty look about himself. And in fact, he thinks to himself that if he could get close to Captain America, he can get close to the president. So presumably, he's got some nefarious motives for being there. So as Steve, he's still basically talking. He doesn't seem to be talking to the people in the room, but he's talking about courage and honorary bravery and the need to be strong. And they're listening as if they're listening into a conversation. And the story shifts back to Corporal Newman in Afghanistan. And at this point, they're out on convoy, and they've been ordered to check out this cave. So there was apparently an insurgent facility that was blown up. But the rumor is that the insurgents were storing their weapons and explosive in this cave. And soldiers, the Marines here, have been ordered to go into the cave, find that ordnance and destroy it. So Newman and his squad approach the cave. And as I said, they've got orders to go into it. And he's a little bit nervous. In fact, a lot nervous, because he's very fearful, he admits, of enclosed spaces. And we get to learn why, because as a young boy, we get a flashback. As a young boy playing hide and seek with his friend at the junkyard, he gets locked into a car trunk where he has designed himself to hide, and it's almost airless, and it's very hot, and there's a very, very large dog that's prowling around the junkyard, and he's terrified. And so, that's in the back of his mind. But he knows he has to go. And so he does his duty, and he goes into the cave with the squad. And they find this cache of weapons and explosives, and they're setting the charges to destroy it. But there's a couple of insurgents in the cave, and they're attacked with a few hand grenades. Ultimately, there's a collapse of the cave entrance. A couple of the soldiers are trapped, and he ends up down there with a couple wounded, along with himself. And there's no way out. So they're stuck. They don't know what to do. And he says, he's worried about his son. He's worried about his wife. He wants to get the heck out of there. He's terrified, and he calls out to Captain America, right? He's calling out to his captain on the radio, but there's no radio communications at this point because of the collapse. And he's calling and calling and calling for his captain to begin a rescue mission. But what happens is he sees Captain America once again. And Captain America tells him, "You're braver than you think." And naturally, Newman is confused. He plainly sees Cap in front of him, but Cap reveals to him that what he's seeing is he's seeing Captain America in his mind. He's not there in reality in front of him, even though he seems very real. And Cap goes on to tell him that he knows that experience of being trapped in the trunk because he knows Newman's mind. He knows his memories. He knows his thoughts. He understands why he's so fearful. But he reminds him that when he was a child and he was stuck, he didn't give up. He didn't give up hope, and he fought to escape that trunk. And he needs to have that same sort of courage now to fight through the fear and to hold on to the hope, because that is going to help him get out of this situation. And Cap reaches out for him in his mind and takes his hand, and he says, "I'm going to give you some of my own strength to get you through this moment." And then we sit back to the medical facility in the story, and Cap is still on the gurney. And in this mind conversation he's having with Corporal Newman, he reveals to him that, in fact, he's dying. And this issue ends with that revelation that Cap is really wasting away as he's having this mind link with Corporal Newman.
Yeah, nice recap. And again, probably didn't. We're not doing the art justice by going through it so quickly, because it really is some really great art. And Steve is back in uniform by the end of this issue.
He is, and he's got that great chain mail, right? That very pronounced chain mail on his uniform. How about issue 3, Rick? What can you tell us?
All right, so issue 3 is the title to this one is called "Out of Body, Out of Mind," and so the first couple of pages we're at a secret lab in Washington, and as you mentioned before, Captain America is lying there, dying, emaciated, and only his strength of will is really keeping him alive to keep the dream of his mission alive. And then we cut back to, on the third page, to Afghanistan. And we see that the uh, Corporal Newman's squad. No, what is it,
Yeah.
Bob?
Yeah, I think he's with a squad. This
Okay.
looks like a squad size unit.
We went through this before. Squad,
Yeah.
team, unit. I don't know.
It's confusing.
There's so many others.
There are.
So anyway, his squad, including his captain, is standing over the um, the closed entrance to the cave, and they're like, "We don't know how we're going to be able to get in." And so we cut to the conversation between Corporal Newman and Captain America, and Corporal Newman's talking with him as if he's right there, and he says, "You're dying? That's impossible. You look like the healthiest looking man I've ever seen." Yet his some other members that were in the cave with him are injured because of the collapse, right? So one is talking about his legs, another his chest, another one is like, Jimmy, who are you talking to? And Cap's like, yeah, I'm not really here. I'm only in your mind. And so it's pretty cool because he then explains that, yeah, I know you think that I was with you in the village, but really it was you who helped carry the wounded to safety. It was you who took out the enemy, and so James starts to think of himself as maybe he's hallucinating, maybe he's going crazy, but he hears one of his colleagues say, "Jimmy, I can't breathe. There's not enough air." And then again, he goes back to his trunk experience when he was a kid, and and realizing what he needs to do. He needs to stand, to kind of stand up and move forward. So he goes and he starts taking the rocks and start pulling them away from the entrance that collapsed. But he realizes that he's not going to be able to get through that. And um, Cap's kind of talking him through it, and he's like, "How do you know anything about me?" He goes, "I know everything that's in your mind." And he talks about how he is in a guarded medical facility in Washington, and that his body is failing from the effects of the super soldier serum. And his mental abilities have increased, though, where he could visualize enemy bases overseas and use that to guide military missions. He then discovers that he could will other people to see him as kind of like a trick to deceive the enemy. But then, at this moment, Cap's vital signs fail, and he starts to fade from Jimmy's view. And so it was interesting to hear about all this, right? That Cap is um, the super soldier serum is killing him. It's failing him, and he's dying. And Steve's not going to just give up. He's like, well, my mind's still as sharp as ever. And so he volunteered for that experiment again, once again, to do what he can to serve his country. And they come up with this experiment on his mind that allows him to do these things. Um, and there's a scene where you get to see Cap kind of tricking, members of Al Qaeda in the desert, where they end up, firing on each other and hitting ammunition and blowing up everything, because Cap's not there. The bullets are going through him. And as I mentioned, he disappears. But his last words to Corporal James is of encouragement, and he at that point, James is like, he's back in the cave, and he's unable to believe his eyes and unable to help his dying comrades, and he doesn't. He's at despair. But he all of a sudden hears some dripping and some water dripping, And that is where we go into the next issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you can imagine that sort of despair, right? Well, everybody's counting on him, but he doesn't have the answers, right? And he's carrying fear. He's got this voice in his head, right? This vision in his head, but he doesn't have any answers. And then, like, some weird synchronicity, he starts to hear this dripping of water. And so in this chapter, we start off right there back in the cave, and it's very clear that they're running out of water. It's hot in Afghanistan. They're stuck in a cave. They're running out of air. They don't have food. We've got some wounded. They're bleeding out. They need water. That's the number one priority. And their canteens are empty. And in fact, the first panel of this issue is an empty canteen. So they're encouraging him to, like, you got to find it. You got to follow that dripping sound. So while he's doing this and he's wrestling with this, right, because he's full of fear, Cap's still on the gurney, and he's not doing well. The alarms are going off, and they're trying to bring him back and get his heart, strong enough, because they're saying he can't handle the strain of whatever he's doing in his mind. So Jimmy, Corporal Newman, goes off in search of this drip, drip, drip. And Cap appears in his mind, reminding him that you are a hero, Jimmy. Reach inside as deeply as you can. And he moves out trying to find that water source. And he does find it. There's some water pooling from some water dripping from the roof, but he also sees there's a skeleton there. And he's not sure if the water is polluted in some way or poisoned, and it's killed this individual who tried to drink it. And so he's wrestling here for like a few pages about what to do. Should he drink the water? Should he bring the water back? What if the water's poisoned? What if it's not poisoned? What if this guy died from some other causes and the water just happens to be here? Maybe the guy didn't even get a chance to drink the water. And he's, we've all been in these positions where we can't really make a decision, right? We're torn between two really not good outcomes. And he's trying to figure out what the best possible situation is, but he can't quite seem to bring himself to a decision. But he sees a bug, and the bug's, not dead. So he dips the bug in the water. And then at first it seems like the bug is dead, but the bug comes to life. And then he thinks, oh my gosh, okay, the water's not poisoned. And then he says, well, what if it takes longer for the bug to die? So, and he gets back into this cycle of not being able to decide. And then he hears his friend call out to him, Jimmy. And he realizes that, like, he's got to make a decision. So he reaches down with all the courage he can muster, and he takes a sip of the water. And they teach you this in the military, Rick. I don't know if you know this, but like one guy's got to like lift that gas mask up and test the air to see, if it's breathable. And they have all sorts of, alarm systems and chemical detectors. But at some point, somebody's got to be the first guy to take that mask off. You don't want to have to be that first guy, right? But you got to do it for all your other squad mates or company mates. And so he does it. He drinks the water, and he realizes it's okay. So he fills up his canteen and he runs back. And now he's done all this without Cap prompting him at this point, because back in the facility, we see Cap struggling still. So he gets back, helps his friends, and then Cap shows up again to him, and something's off. In fact, even now, Newman, when he had seen Cap before, Cap looked robust and muscular, like we all know Cap to look. But in this case, he isn't looking good. He's looking gaunt and emaciated. And Cap asks him, are you afraid? And he's like, yeah, I'm afraid. I'm trapped in here. I've got guys that are wounded, we were just in an ambush, and yeah, I'm afraid. I've got a wife and a kid at home. I'm scared that I'm not going to get back. And so this is like Groundhog Day for him. Every day, facing the same fears every day. And it's debilitating, right? It's just eroding his confidence and his sense of courage. And he just wants to go home. So Cap starts to talk to him about how, like, yeah, that's been my story for decades. Ever since I became Captain America, for decades, this has been my life. I have dealt with this thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and I'm afraid every single time. It doesn't end. And then he proceeds to talk about how he first became Captain America and how he got pulled into the Project Rebirth, and it actually pulls from the Adventures of Captain America origin story, where there were a number of
Yeah, I
individuals.
noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah. So a number of individuals that were tested, right? And some of them were very muscular, different body types, different personalities. And he didn't think he was going to get very far. In fact, nobody thought he was going to get very far. But Colonel Fletcher, James Fletcher, who was running the military side of this operation for Dr. Erskine, had faith in him and kept pushing Steve Rogers and pushing him. And ultimately, he reveals that, it proved that he was the only one that had the humility, because all these other guys had known strength. It's almost like the first Avenger movie, right? Where all these guys were so cocksure and lacking in humility about their strength that they became bullies, because the super soldier serum accentuated who they already were. But for Steve Rogers, he was humble, and he knew the strength of having power and using power for good purposes. So it continues to go on, talks about the origin story, talks about when he was actually given the super soldier serum, and then the assassination of Dr. Erskine as soon as the Vita rays had been applied, and Steve Rogers had become that first super soldier, the first and only super soldier. And then he explains, that was great, gave me all these great capabilities, but now that serum is failing me. Little by little, it is taking away my vitality and my muscle and all those other things. And as he's telling this story, Jimmy's looking and looking and looking for a way out of that cave, and he sees a tiny, tiny little crevice. It's probably only a few feet wide, maybe a foot high, and that's the only potential way out of this situation. It might lead to nowhere, might be a dead end, or it might be a way out of this cave. But he's terrified about entering into that crevice. And Cap says to him that you have to do it. This is the fear that I felt for, all these thousands of times I've faced danger. It's the fear you fear every day, and you're going to always feel this fear, but you have to push through it. And that is where this issue ends.
Yeah, nice recap. Yeah, it's interesting that the Morrell had referenced the Adventures of Captain America, as a took some elements from there, as far as Steve Rogers' origin. So we'll have to ask him about that next episode, if that was, I guess, a source material for him. All right, this next issue is issue 5. It's titled "The Crucible," and as we left off, um, he is about to look at going down into that small crevice that you mentioned, and he is claustrophobic. And I got to tell you, I don't consider myself claustrophobic, but this issue got me.
Yeah,
Man, it really, the way it was written, the way it was drawn, it really, I felt the tension, just of having to go into a small place that you have no idea what's on the other end,
yeah.
and how you could get out.
Could have ants. I fear ants, Rick.
I did not know that.
I have a huge phobia of ants. So
you're okay with uncles?
Uncles are fine. Yeah, it's the aunties that get me every time.
Mm. You ever see that commercial?
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah.
All the ants.
Yeah, we have ants. They're walking around going, expired, expired, expired. It's a big place. You're going to be able to keep it clean. All right. So he's terrified, and you could see the wide eyes. You could see the sweat coming down, and Cap's trying to give him some sort of comfort by empathizing with him and saying that he is also somebody who has had to fight fear. And so Corporal James, he goes down and he starts. He has this little flashlight on the top of his helmet, so he can see where he's going. but only probably so far in front of him, and he's shimming, doing the army crawl, um, and going through this really small crevice that looks like it's heading down, which is also has to be disconcerting, right?
Yeah.
Because
Not
you
the
want
way
to be
you want to
going
go.
up,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And he's crawling through, and he's like, um, I can you talk to me? Because I don't want to feel alone. Dying alone, that's not how I want it to happen. And he's like, tight, I can hardly breathe. Talk to me, Cap. Let me hear your voice. Now he had gone on for 6 panels asking Cap to talk to him. And eventually he does. And we cut back to the headquarters where he's laying on the gurney, and there's, you know, a medical alarm going off.
Yeah.
And he
I
says,
can hear minions,
wee oo,
from,
wee
yeah.
oo.
That's how it's actually spelled, right?
Yeah. Uh
Yeah.
huh. And he asks him, what do you want to talk about? Um, Tell me why you were afraid. And so Steve goes on to talk about, and I think this is relevant, and he goes to talk about how he couldn't stop um, terrible things from happening when Professor Erskine was murdered, um, and then he couldn't rescue
Colonel Fletcher. Yeah.
Colonel Fletcher.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he was killed, um, and then he talked about how Bucky was like a brother to him, and he died, and he says, and it continued, so many friends, so many people I cared about. I kept fearing who else would die. I pushed myself to the limit, trying to keep them safe. Strangers, too. So many strangers depended on me. The country depended on me. A lifetime of trying. That's why I was afraid of failing. And then at this point, the corporal says, Cap, I'm stuck. I can't move any further. And my belt's caught on something. I'm trapped. Help me. And Steve says, the only person who can help is you. Never stop hoping, Jimmy. Never give up. And so at this point, the corporal, with a very determined look on his face, he shimmies, he sucks in his stomach, he squeezes his shoulders, he manages to get through, and he keeps going further, and it gets wider and wider. So he finally gets to an opening, but there's a block at the end. There's a big rock, a big boulder, but somehow he has the strength and he pushes through and he makes it. But there's a huge crevice there. There's a huge opening, a gap. It's got to be what, 25 feet?
Yeah, at least, right? I mean, it's huge. It's not something I'd want to jump across, that's for sure.
Yeah. And Cap says you have to jump it. And he says, I can't, I'm afraid. And Cap says, of course you are. Courage can't exist without fear. You can't be a hero unless you overcome fear, which is true. And I've heard that before. But he says the same thing that I think I probably would want to say. And that's, but I don't want to be a hero.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, you already are. Why do you think I chose you? Chose me? What are you talking about? There's been a massive security breach. Nazi assassins could be anywhere. Knowing too well that I was human, Colonel Fletcher protected the experiment and ordered soldiers to hide me in plain sight. And then he goes on to explain what he did during World War II. And how he helped against the saboteurs before he went actually off into battle. He says, but always afterward, I shook from the effects of adrenaline, from the knowledge that I could have been killed. And so he goes on to talk about how World War II goes on, and at this point, he's still, they did it. The government didn't want to risk him, so they used him more as a kind of a showpiece. And, but at this point, Cap played his hand. He's like, no, I want to be out there with the other soldiers. And so there's a scene where he jumps out of the plane and he pulls his parachute at the last second, and really gives the soldiers on the ground a show, and a show of courage. And so at this point, Corporal James does the leap over, and he barely makes it. He grabs onto the edge, and he pulls himself up. And there's Cap on the other side waiting. And he says that he finally convinced the brass to let him be out there with the soldiers. And so he did as much as he could as Steve Rogers, because he knew being Captain America out there would draw too much attention onto his squad. And James says, all these years you've never stopped. It must have been exhausting. And he said there wasn't time to think about that. A new crisis always came along. I was always needed somewhere else. And you said you chose me. What did that mean? You're not ready to hear that yet. First, I need to tell you one more thing, how I got sick. And then the last panel is, it looks like Cap going into cardiac arrest. And they say, General, we're losing him. To be concluded.
Oh man, Rick, that's a man. How can you buy that issue and not get the next one?
I know, right?
Right? Yeah. So the last book, book 6, the final book of the series, the title is Multitude. So that's a tease right there. And this issue's got a great cover, Rick. We haven't touched on the cover since the first one, but this one has Cap standing on the cover, and it's a perspective looking down at Cap, at maybe like a 45-degree angle, looking toward him from up ahead, up top, and he's got his shield and he's standing there. But behind him, we see 10 other individuals, men, women. We've got a soldier. We've got people in different walks of life, different clothes, and they've all got shields raising it above their heads. So it's a really interesting cover and a really inspiring cover. So we start this issue with that high security medical facility outside of Washington, D.C., and there's a limousine that arrives. And the soldiers are, gossiping like they always do, that this has to be somebody really, really important, and there must be something really big going on for this guy to show up. And we cut to inside the medical facility, and we realize that this is the president of the United States, and he's been summoned to see Cap because Cap's situation is dire. And the president wants to know if Cap has completed Project Multitude. So we don't know what that is yet, but that's the name of this chapter. So very, very interesting. And they respond to the president that they don't know because Steve Rogers hasn't communicated with them in several days, and he hasn't had anything to eat or drink. So he is declining rapidly, and he's not telling anybody around him what is going on in his head. But they do hear him talking to someone. They just don't know who. So it cuts back to Afghanistan, and we see Corporal Newman is still trying to make it out of the cave as the vision of Cap recounts how he began to lose his power and how it began to happen more and more frequently. And it turns out the medical experts determined that he was losing muscle density. He wasn't able to metabolize oxygen efficiently. And at the end, what they determined or decided was that the super soldier process was not only failing, but Steve Rogers was essentially reverting back to his pre-serum body. So, Newman's like shocked at this, but Cap tells him that like it's actually much worse than that. And so I actually wanted to hold on a second here because I wanted to read a quote because I thought it was really, really important here. Cap says, perhaps it was a lifetime of loneliness, of grief and loss, of learning not to have friends and a family because I'd make them a target and get them killed. Or It could have been the weariness. And we start to see different scenes. We see a scene of Cap in the wreckage of 9/11 trying to hold up the shattered walls of a building. And then he goes on to say of a lifetime of fighting evil. And we see him in Nazi Germany, presumably at a concentration camp. And then we see him trapped in ice. And we hear him say, or perhaps it was the plane explosion that trapped me in ice years ago. And then we see him sitting on a bench, and it looks like it's the 1960s because there's a woman in a miniskirt, and she's got a bag that says it has the Beatles on it, and there's a newspaper about the Soviet missile threat. And then he goes on to say, I never felt the same after the ice. In my mind, the year was 1945, but suddenly it was decades later. So much time was lost. So much was changed. Friends had died. The war was over. Another war had started and ended. Something called the Cold War was now being waged. My mind reeled as I learned about the atomic bomb and even the even more devastating hydrogen bomb. Captain America was needed more than ever, again and again. And he speculates that, well, maybe it was the process of being frozen in the ice that caused the super soldier serum to start to break down. But whatever it was, he started to get more and more frail. And it wasn't that he was just reverting back to his pre-super soldier serum, Steve Rogers. He was actually beginning to have a physical collapse. So he knew that this would lead to his death. So he goes on to tell Newman that every time he does this mental connection with him, it's basically sucking his life out of him. But he's making this sacrifice, trying to reach out to Newman because he wants Newman to replace him. And because Newman has something that really is far more valuable than the speed and the musculature and all that reflexes and all those things that Cap got from the super soldier serum. And he tells him what he has that makes him a hero is he's got courage and he's got honor and loyalty and the willing to sacrifice. And he says, I looked for someone who cared for the future, who thought about others, who understood that only cowards turn their back on a righteous task, someone who looked fear in the face, but still did the right thing. And then Newman asks him what is a reasonable question. He says, if you couldn't finish the job, what hope does an ordinary person like me have? And this is when we learn what Project Multitude is, because Cap explains that all this time that he's been reaching out mentally and inspiring Corporal James Newman, he has been reaching out to a multitude of others. He's been communicating with firefighters and search and rescue personnel and doctors and scientists and construction workers and pilots and teachers and farmers and truckers. Other people who don't think themselves are heroes, but they're out there doing the job every single day, trying to make the world a better place. And there's this great double page splash on, I think it's page 15 and 16 of this issue that shows all those different professions. And Cap has been reaching out to all of them. And this is what the president was talking about when he was talking about Project Multitude. Cap is not preparing one person to take over for him. He's preparing a multitude. So Cap goes on to say that he's chosen as many as he can to the limits of his remaining strength, even though it's killing him. He's trying to inspire in them the generosity and the determination to make the people the best that they can be. And as he's having this conversation with Newman, the president leans in to listen to what Cap is saying. And he fails to see that guy that we saw in issue 1, that technician that was kind of lurking around and thinking about getting close to the president, the
one who had a look in his eye,
the one who had that gleam in his eye, that look in his eye, right? And so guy pulls out a knife.
Actually, it's just a screwdriver.
Oh, is it a screwdriver? Oh yeah, he's a technician, right? Yeah. So he pulls out a screwdriver and he starts to make a run toward the president, trying to lunge him. And sensing the danger, Cap uses the last of his strength to leap off the gurney to shield the president in attempt to tackle this assassin as the other agents around them shoot the assassin. And this last bit of exertion proves to be too much for Cap, and he begins to fade. But as he does, he reaches out to Newman one more time telepathically, and he says, save your team. Keep trying, Jimmy. Never stop. Inside you, inside everyone, if they'll listen. Keep trying, Jimmy. Never give up. And then Cap goes silent. So back in Afghanistan,
Now,
Newman.
did
Oh,
you explain what happened to Cap with the screwdriver?
I don't. I didn't see the screwdriver go in him. Did it?
Yeah, look a little closer.
Oh, all right.
It,
Yeah. Maybe I missed that.
it they killed him.
Yeah. I
Look
don't
at
see
his
him.
right eye. Yeah, so what happened was this guy went to go for the president and Cap got in his
Oh,
way
you're right. I didn't
and he
even
stuck
notice
the
that.
screwdriver in his right eye, which went into Cap's brain.
Yeah, it's his left eye, but you're right.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, his left eye.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I didn't even notice that. But you're right. It got jammed in his eye. So he goes silent. And we cut back to Afghanistan and Newman emerges from the cave. But at this point, his squad had basically given up getting these guys out of the cave, and the convoy moves off down the road. And there are these insurgents up on a hilltop, and they're getting ready to, again, as you pointed out before, they've got RPGs, and they're going to attack this convoy with an ambush. And Newman goes ballistic, right? He goes on fire, and he runs after the insurgents and basically takes them all out. But as he's doing this, we see glimmers of Captain America overlaid on top of Newman, as if he is now inspired by the spirit of Captain America. And when the firefight's over, and the squad returns to the cave to get the teammates out of where they've been trapped, Newman is the first guy who volunteers to lead everybody back into the cave. And he tells his commander, "I'm convinced there's a little bit of Cap in all of us, sir." And here's the great thing: as the captain looks down into the cave and he sees Newman lowering himself down into the darkness, he too sees a vision of Cap looking on. And we hear Cap's voice one more time say, "Try hard enough, reach deeply enough. If people will only believe I'm inside them, I'll never truly die." And that's the end of the story.
Man, that was an intense story. It really
Yeah.
was. It was impactful to see how Cap can inspire, um, but the fear that Corporal James had to go through his own personal hell, being claustrophobic. Uh, man, it was such a good story.
It was, and the thing that gets me, there's a number of things about this story that really appeal to me, but I think one of the things that really truly touches me is that we learn at the end that Newman is just one of many stories that is
Hmm.
going on simultaneously in Cap's mind. Right, he's reaching out to all these people, the multitude, and so we're just seeing one of them, but he's in there inspiring all these people throughout the country and the world, presumably to have a little bit of Cap, right? What asking themselves, what would Cap do?
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just beautiful stuff. Beautiful. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that double wide splash of all of the professions. That's one of the pieces I recently bought.
Oh,
Uh,
that's so cool.
yeah. So it doesn't have
Yeah.
Cap in it at all, but it's Cap. The
Cap
lettering.
inspiring people. Yeah.
Yeah, is Cap inspiring all these people to ask themselves what would Cap do and then do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a cool last story of Steve Rogers, right? There's been a few,
Yeah.
and but this one, I think it's a great way for Steve to go out on a lot of levels, right? There's the super soldier serum and the stress and the of the lifetime of service that he gave and constantly being in fear took its toll. And he's like, you know what? My mind's still sharp. I'm gonna volunteer for this.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
like he did when he was a 98-pound weakling, right? His heart and his courage. So number one, I think that's really cool. Number
Mm-hmm.
two, at the very end, uh, he stepped in front of the president to save him. So
Yeah.
he went out a hero in that regard as well.
Right. Yeah.
He gave everything he could give, and at the end of the day, all he cared about at the very end was how am I going to continue to inspire people so that they can continue to do this.
Yeah, yeah. It's so Steve Rogers, right?
Yeah.
It really is. And the other thing that I really like about this story is, this was obviously written in 2007, and Dave Morrell, as the author of the Rambo story, the creator of Rambo: First Blood, 1972, when that came out, was one of the first really authors to tackle this question of post-traumatic stress disorder and the impact of combat or any traumatic incident, particularly cumulatively, on a person's physical and mental health. And so he's incorporated that into the story here. And it's not something we talk about a lot, right? You think about all the things that Cap has seen, and we know that he remembers everything. So he doesn't even have the blessing of being able to forget what he has seen and experienced. So he has experienced this. And as he talks about in the story, he can be wounded, right? I mean, one of those scenes shows him, being too close to a hand grenade. It shows him getting shot in combat, and he has to heal from those things. But those are traumatic physical injuries that he experiences. And so in addition to the mental trauma, this has taken a cumulative toll on him. And his courage is that he continues to do his duty, even knowing that he has to push through this fear that he experiences every time to do it. And that's real courage, right?
It absolutely is. Absolutely is. Okay, we're gonna do a our normal favorite panel, and this is of all 6 issues. And you went first last time, so I get to go first. And I'm going to go with issue number 1, and it is a double page splash of pages 15 and 16.
Wow, that's a great one, Rick.
Yeah, it's the one where Cap and Corporal James are running out, and it's like that double page splash with that horizontal thing, and you just see the back of Cap as he has his shield up, and it's being ricocheted on, but the background, the foreground, the sandstorm, the person who's calling for help, and Cap's like, "We're coming." It's such a cool image, especially because you're looking at from the back of Cap, and then when you get into the detail of the uniform and the boot, the bottom of the boot, and the wreckage of the car, it's so much going on in this one panel. I'm so glad they made it into a double page, half page splash, because it's really cool, really intense.
Wow, good choice. Good choice.
How about you? What's your favorite panel?
Well, I'm going to go with I think it's maybe page 14 of issue 5. So there's a double page, half page double splash of aircraft dropping bombs on a U.S. Navy ship, and then there's 6 smaller panels below, and Steve is recounting the training he went through. But the last panel on that page is Steve sitting on his bunk, and it's from behind him, and he's looking at his hands. And you can imagine that they're shaking. And in the text, it says, "But always afterward, I shook from the effects of adrenaline, from the knowledge that I could have been killed." And it's such a vulnerable panel. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's not something we often think of Steve Rogers, the superhero, the super soldier, dealing with. But all that fear of being human in combat, which is a very human experience, he feels, and he's felt it so many times, and he has to live with it. But it does take a toll. And he's sitting here alone on his bunk, working through those feelings. And to me, it's a very emotionally powerful and a vulnerable image of Steve Rogers. So for that reason, it's my favorite panel. And in fact, I bought these 2 pages recently.
Because how cool is that?
I love that panel so much.
And then, do you have a something that's going on a T-shirt for you?
Well, I do. I'm Rick. I got to go with the cover to issue 6.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. So that picture of that image of Cap with his shield and those 10, civilians behind him, men and women holding the shields in the air. Man, I got to have that on a shirt, right? Because we all have the potential to be like Cap, and we should try. So that shirt says it. You don't even need text on it.
That's true.
Yeah. And how about yourself?
I'm going to go with issue 2, and it was I can't remember the page number, um, but it's a 2/3 page splash, and it's Cap standing there, kind of in a Captain Morgan pose with his left knee up, and he's standing with the shield, and he's looking down at the corporal, and uh, it's just a really great image, great detail, great pose, great solemnness. And then on top of that, the word balloon says courage, honor, loyalty, sacrifice.
Nice.
Boom.
You can't
Perfect to
beat
put on a
that.
t-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah. That belongs on a t-shirt.
Yep.
All right. Well, what about your time capsule, Rick?
I could go for the easy one, Bob, which would have been, anything referencing 9/11. But
Ooh.
I decided I'm going to go with the issue 1,
Yeah.
the second and third page, which is a double page splash, and it says Afghanistan, and that's when we see them rolling out in the Humvees, and so it definitely points to a period of time where U.S. armed forces were over in Afghanistan, and that's going to my time capsule.
Nice. I like that.
How about
Well,
you?
I am going to go with the easy one, Rick, from my perspective. And that is the whole darn remote viewing thing. So, like, were you familiar with this concept of remote viewing before reading this issue?
I know what remote viewing means in general, but what are you specifically
So
referring to?
remote viewing was a U.S. Army project that started in the early 1970s and continued until it was taken over from the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I used to work, to the CIA, and eventually disbanded in 1995 after a study showed that it really didn't have much success. But it was exactly what Cap was talking about, where U.S. soldiers were trained to sit in a very quiet room and use mental energy. So it's basically clairvoyance, telepathy, whatever you want to call it, to try to remotely view enemy facilities on the other side of the world. So just as Cap was like sketching out where the bad guy installations were so that they could drop bombs, the US Army was actually studying this and spent tens of millions of dollars and had soldiers on active duty. Their full-time jobs were to do this, and went under a bunch of different names, including Flame Grill. And in fact, I think they tried to use it during the was it 1980 or 1979, the rescue mission in Iran to get the embassy hostages out under Carter administration. They tried to use remote viewing to see the landing area in advance. So this was a real thing. So Morrell didn't just like pull this out of a hat. He was pulling from real world Army projects.
Oh, we're gonna have to ask him about that.
Yeah, I know, right? There was actually a movie, I think it was around 2007, maybe, with George Clooney called Men Who Stare at Goats.
Yeah. I didn't see it,
Yeah.
but I remember that movie. Yeah.
Ewan McGregor. It had Clooney. A bunch of Jeff Bridges was in it, and it was about this unit, this Army unit. So there you have it. So it was disbanded finally in 1995, or so we've been told.
All right. Yeah, definitely need to talk to Morrell about that.
Yeah.
So looking forward to next episode. It'll be really cool to have him on.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts, Bob?
No, thank you for checking this one off my bucket list, Rick.
You're welcome, because that's what I'm here for, Bob.
You're a pleaser.
I can't wait. I am. I'm a giver.
Yeah.
Although my doctor says I'm a carrier. Oh, Bob, before I forget, we do want to call out. We do have some new supporters of the show.
Well, that's always good to hear.
Yeah, we have 2 that have come back. These are people who were giving us support previously and are back. And so, thanks to Wes Keller and Seth Offenberger.
Nice.
Wes, Seth, we really appreciate you guys coming back. Thanks so much. And then also, we got a new one as a shield slinger, a new member, and it is none other than Jason Olson,
Yeah, the famous Jason Olson we
the one and
all
the
know and
same.
love.
Yeah, who's been a
Awesome.
guest on the show, what, 4 times now, something like that.
Yes.
He's a writer of the book about Mark Grunwald, and we loved having him on the show, and I'm sure he'll be back as well. And heck, we even had his wife and daughter on the show in
That's
episode
right. That's right.
200.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's a family
yeah.
affair.
It really is. So thank you, Jason. We appreciate you signing on to support the show. And if anyone else would like to show their support of the entertainment that we provide you on a weekly basis, please go to buymeacoffee.com/Cap Comic Fans. There's a link in the show notes, and you can go on there. You can give a one-time donation, or you can sign up and as a member and get perks. So we always do appreciate that. And also, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen.
That's awesome, Rick. We have so many great patrons, and it's always great to have new ones. And let's hope we can announce some new ones every episode.
That'd be great. All right, Bob. As always, it's been so much fun wrapping Cap with you.
It has. Can't wait till next week.
All right. Thank you so much. He's Bob. I'm Rick. And you have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.